Welcome back to Inside Politics. Our guest today is David Plazas. He's the Director of Opinion and Engagement for the USA Today Network, Tennessee. David, we talked a little bit about voter turnout. It does appear that we're doing better for this midterm election in the early voting statewide. We were 50th in 2014. Looks like our numbers will be better based on the early voting. In fact, it's very good here in Davidson County and up in Williamson County and other counties. I think it was up 66 counties out of 99, which was very good. But we may just be up not much more than the other states, and so therefore we may still wind up being 49th or 50th.
If we are 49th or 50th but have increased in voter turnout, that'll make me very happy, because we went from 1.8 million votes in 2006 in the midterms all the way to 1.4 million in 2014.
We're the volunteer state. Why don't people in Tennessee vote?
You know, this is a great question. It might be a couple of things. It might be the fact that you know, people have talked about the issue of access. I wrote a piece recently that looked at, you know, what can we do to make voting easier for people in an instantaneous society, which we talked about in the first segment. You know, why can't people register to vote on the same day that they go vote? You know, that's effective in multiple states. And why can't people mail in their ballots?
But won't people who don't like that idea say, well, that's just going to increase voter fraud? That really opens us up for a lot more voter fraud than we have now.
I've never seen evidence of that. And if we look at the 2016 election, Trey Hargett, the Secretary of State, was only able to show a few dozen cases of voter fraud. I think it was around 50 or so, and millions were said to have happened, and that's simply not true.
Well, what about being able to vote online? Although there are people in Washington now saying we ought to get rid of all the electronic voting because they're a lot easier to hack. I guess we'd all go back to paper ballots.
Well, you know, that's true. The last state I lived in was Florida, and they went to a paper ballot, and it can be, you have to have
the hanging chads too.
They had the hanging chads. Well, that was before that they changed it. They changed multiple times. But I'll tell you, there should be multiple approaches. One thing we might consider, and it's certainly been debated, is the issue of a paper receipt. That is, once you vote, can you have a paper receipt that the state has so that they can keep track of those on paper, so it's not just in the electronic system? Because yeah, what if those results are hacked? Tennessee was not one of the states that was hacked in 2016, but Knox County website was hacked in May, and so this is certainly a real issue for us.
A lot of people said that early voting would help increase turnout. It appears all it's done is make it more convenient for people that were going to vote anyway, and it doesn't appear to have increased turnout at all.
Yeah, it's a wonderful service, though, because not every state has early voting. It should be something, I think, that all states have, and the reality is that weekend voting, I myself went voting last Saturday because during the week it can be challenging for me too.
Well, why not put election day on a weekend? Why not put it on a day where it's easier instead of a work day? Or, I mean, most of the election rules and times we have in this state are based on an agricultural society, and while agriculture is still a very big deal here, it's not what it used to be in terms of what's going on in the urban areas. Why not weekend voting?
I think it's a great idea. I mean, we had the opportunity to celebrate this, to have a day where we just, like a July 4th, where we come together and say it's time to vote and be proud of it in all these local elections. I know people have felt like there's been a saturation of elections in Metro, with special election for the mayor, with transit. We've got the August 2nd primary, could have a runoff for that. But at the same time, this is important.
To come.
Yep, and this is important. This is important stuff. This is our democracy. This is our republic. We have a responsibility.
Then there's the whole thing about voter purging. The Supreme Court basically said that states can go out and get rid of people if they don't vote, and I don't know that the court actually determined how frequently you have to vote not to be purged, but the Ohio law they looked at, you could do it after missing just, say, 1 or 2 cycles.
I should clarify, it was a very narrow decision for that Ohio law and for that circuit it's in. So it doesn't necessarily affect Tennessee, although Tennessee decided to rescind that.
Tennessee changed their law, so it wasn't like Ohio. Will they now change it back?
They could come, and I hope they don't. I would press legislators to please don't make it more difficult for people to come and access the ballot.
There are many stories we've talked again about the Russian interference. The whole thing about what's been going on in the ongoing investigation with Russia. Are you concerned that between now and November that's going to put us in an even more high state of unhappiness and lack of civility on both sides? Again, because everybody has their own set of facts and ideas about that, and there's not a whole lot of common ground when they start talking. People get hot about it pretty quick.
Certainly, although one of the things I will tell you that even senators, both Republican and Democratic and members of Congress and members of the House, have talked about the fact that they validate the intelligence reports. The question is, what can we do to tell the story without getting too hot-headed? If we start screaming at each other, you know, the Russians are here, let's get to what the facts are, and let's get to the fact we need to have secure voting.
But if we start getting into subpoenas and indictments, perhaps, I don't want to say that's going to happen, but there's a lot of things that could ratchet this up to an area, and if that happens between now and November, it's going to be considered to be Even more political than it will be considered. I mean,
now there were 11 House Republicans who decided they wanted to file out articles of impeachment against Rod Rosenstein, the assistant or the Deputy Attorney General.
And now they've backed off about that.
Well, they're going to recess, and they could always bring it back. Speaker Ryan has said he's not going to bring it up anytime soon.
I think they're going to bring up instead maybe some contempt of Congress, which sounds bad, but is not certainly not on the level of impeachment.
That's correct. It's more symbolic than anything.
But I mean, I think there's some real issues about how difficult this could be. I know you're trying to do things to keep civility around, but that could be even more difficult as this conversation gets more intense for some reason.
You know, one lesson for this is one should be very judicious about how one tweets.
Well, how do you deal with that? I mean, you write things in the paper, you get emails, you get phone calls, you probably get tweets. Is your goal to read them and maybe count to 10, think about it for a while, or some you don't respond to? How do you deal with that?
No, it's one of those things that I do seek to respond to every single email that I receive and tweet as often as I can, but I do count to 10 or maybe a little bit longer before I respond, because you don't want to respond in anger. You know, you want to respond because sometimes people have an argument that makes sense. You know, in media circles, people see you sometimes as very powerful. Sometimes you can address an issue they have, and sometimes you can't. But at the very least, you can have a response. It doesn't have to be, you know, why would you question me? People should question us. They should question us, and they should demand a lot from us.
So you talk about being an active citizen. What does being an active citizen mean beyond just voting? Although right now, getting them to register and vote is pretty big challenge, but what else is involved?
It's a big deal. It's understanding what our laws are, reading the Constitution, both the state and national one, understanding, going to city council meetings.
The Metro Charter, for that matter.
The Metro Charter, absolutely. And also being informed about the candidates. And it can be difficult because there's so many of them. And one of the things that we try to do is try to get out, you know, our news site especially, as much information as possible. And during the year, we held a series of forums and debates with gubernatorial candidates to help people understand how they differentiate and what are their beliefs on issues ranging from health care, the TennCare budget, for example, to education, which are huge parts of the Tennessee state budget.
David Plazas is our guest. He's the Director of Opinion and Engagement at the Tennessean, also the USA Today Network Tennessee. Back with our conversation and more questions with David after this break.